Okay, so guys, today I'm going to be doing a presentation about laughing your way through code, the power of stand-up comedy in tech. So as I mentioned just a couple minutes ago, my name is Gusha Salheen, and I'm a solutions architect here at HashiCorp. I'm actually currently in Vegas for our sales kickoff, so it's very, very exciting to be here as well today. Um, I know everyone's probably thinking like, who is this girl? I didn't give you too much context as to this, so you'll understand a bit more about why I chose to do this and a little bit more about this talk as we go forward. I'm going to be talking about a couple different things today. So, one, the connection between humor and innovation. Two, stress relief and resilience in relation to humor. And then some real life examples of tech companies who have used humor in a very productive way, and they've been able to innovate and be more creative with their different solutions. Now, who am I? Did a brief introduction, but I think people, when I do a presentation of this sort, it doesn't make sense. They're like, okay, like you haven't even made us laugh yet, and this girl's gonna start talking to us about stand up. But I actually do stand up comedy on the side. So my background, in undergrad was undergrad. I did my undergraduate degree in computer science and cognitive science with a minor in psychology, and I'm currently pursuing my master's in business. But on the side, as a hobby, I actually perform stand up. So been a very recent development. I actually really started, I don't want to say professionally, but I've been starting to do it properly since for around a year now. And I've taken two stand up courses at the Second City. If those who are not familiar, it is a sort of creative, they have lots of different creative courses. So they have stand up. And so I did stand up one and stand up two there. They have different locations: Toronto, New York, and Chicago. If you can't tell by the way I spell humor, I am Canadian, so I did do it in the Toronto location. So people always ask, like, why did you start doing stand up? I think if you ask any comic this, they will kind of remark that if you were told when you were younger that like you're loud, you like to tell jokes, you kind of like being the center of attention. Like I am a middle child at the end of the day. I feel like you stand up is just like you get to be there and people are forced to listen to you. You hope to make them laugh and it's a really really fun experience. So in this talk I'm going to try to bring forward all of the tools that I have related to my tech background, the work I do now as well as stand up, and talk about why that can all mold together and why it's important to bring other aspects of your life into potentially your work life, not necessarily promoting a lack of work life balance, but kind of showing why the diversity of ideas is super important in the workplace. So let's talk about the importance of humor and laughter. So this is gonna be a bit more scientific. As I mentioned, my background is not necessarily in biology or chemistry or anything of that sort, but I learned a lot through researching this because I wanted to be a bit intentional about what this means. So, what is the importance of humor and laughter? So, so I learned through this that gelotology is the study of laughter and its effects on the body, both from a psychological and physiological perspective. I also learned that it's from the Greek term gelos, which is the god or personified spirit of laughter, which I thought was very interesting. I don't know if anyone's into history like that. But humor was developed as a survival mechanism for trivial collectives, and there's been different studies. So laughing has been linked with lower cardiovascular disease. There's also sorts of different forms of laughter therapy. I personally participated in laughter yoga a few years ago. It is a bit of an uncomfortable experience at first, but I find that it's actually really helpful in kind of letting loose. So if anyone ever sees that they have like a laughter therapy course near them, I would highly, highly suggest doing it. In my research, I actually learned that a 7-week laughter therapy RCT reported significant reductions in pain for cancer patients. So they had these 7 weeks of laughter therapy, and they reported significant reduced levels of pain. So it's really interesting. There's like science back behind why we should laugh, why laughing is important. Also, when you laugh, it engages your abdominal muscles, facial muscles, lungs. So, it's a form of exercise. It is also a group activity, and this is kind of something I'm sure we all implicitly know. When people tend to laugh more if other people are present. A person is actually 30 times more likely to laugh if other people are around. That's why a lot of shows have laugh tracks, because you're more likely to laugh when other people are also laughing with you. So it's sort of a social signal, and we've developed through the years to be like gravitate towards people who are funny. It's almost shows leadership, and I'm going to talk about that later as well. Also, I'm sure some of you have heard funny people are intelligent. And not to toot my own horn, but funny people do tend to have higher IQs. It requires cognitive and emotional ability. And I know I can't read people's reactions now, but some people are probably like, she's not even that funny. But you can't. This talk isn't supposed to be funny. It's supposed to be informative. Um, anyways, also when we laugh, it increases the dopamine production in our brain. So dopamine helps us feel good, but it also opens up the neural centers of our brain, and it enables and sustains more neural connections. And we then become more flexible and creative in our thinking. So humor basically boosts confidence status. You want to listen to people who are funny. You are drawn to people who are funny. Lots of successful leaders use it. Outstanding executives use humor more than twice as often as average executives. So this is all kind of backed up with data. Also, because this is a talk about humor and laughter, there are quite a few tech puns sprinkled throughout my talk. This one I thought was really funny. I'm sure you've read it by now, but it was just a little joke about how everything needs to be an app now. So I don't know if anyone agrees with that, but I thought that was a really funny joke. Now, we can't talk about humor nowadays without talking about AI. We can't really talk about anything nowadays without talking about AI. Firstly, TikTok. TikTok analyzes your behavior as you scroll. They keep track of how you've engaged with stuff. They can tell if you've saved it, if you've liked it, if you've watched it multiple times. They use that data and then they kind of pump things out accordingly. But what's really funny is AI funny? Like, I don't know if anyone's actually tried this. I've actually tried to ask AI to tell me a joke. And I don't really find them interesting, particularly because I think a lot of it is in delivery. But for those who are familiar with the satire site, The Onion, so The Onion will basically have these satire news headlines, and they ask ChatGPT to give a headline as well. So ChatGPT came up with the one that local man discovers new emotion, still can't describe it properly. And the second place, which was written, so I'll explain that in a second, but the one that was written by The Onion was man locks down marriage proposal just as hair loss becomes noticeable. So they asked people to rate these, and ChatGPT came first. The Onion headline came second. So I thought this was really interesting, and I'm really interested to see where AI develops and if AI can kind of be able to make more and more jokes, because they already won in this sort of challenge versus The Onion, which was written by a real person. So it's really interesting to see where AI goes. I don't know too much about this. I'm sure it'll develop a lot in a few years. This is just another pun that I have. I'm your father. Note. This is very, very cute. I also suggest doing for this talk, I looked up a lot of tech puns. It's very, very interesting if anyone's interested. Just Google tech puns. There's so many. Okay, let's talk about humor and innovation and why that's important. So there's a lot of correlation between humor and innovation. So ideation and creativity. So laughter can help people solve problems that demand creative solutions because it's easier for then you to think more broadly and associate ideas and relationships more freely. So think about it, like when you're in a room and people are talking freely and everyone's open, you are also more likely to be more open and talk freer. Research has shown that people in a lighter mood have more eureka moments. And there's also been a study that boosting the mood of different volunteers have increased their likelihood of having an aha moment. And I'm going to steal this joke from the internet. I will say this because I did see somebody else write it and I thought it was really funny. But they said the difference between an aha moment and a ha-ha moment is just one H. I thought that was a cute, funny joke. So it's been shown like in the stats that people are ideating, being more creative when people are funny, people are talking more openly and have that sense of humor. Next, communication. So when you are funny and you are easy to talk to almost, because when you have humor, you're almost easier to talk to and easier to relate to. It allows you to connect with your audience, diffuse tension, elevate status, and foster trust. A lot of people worry about humor because they think that humor is distracting, but it can be a way to make serious talks lighter. And in the tech industry, it can be a way to sort of Make tech concepts more easy to understand because you're making it less intimidating in a sense. You also make environments less tense, and humor can positively affect your creativity and innovation by improving communication because you're more likely to listen to them. You've built a relationship of connection and trust, and that ultimately helps with your communication. Thirdly, sorry, is workplace culture. So you have freedom and psychological safety is necessary to share ideas. So when you have psychological security and psychological safety, you can ultimately be able to innovate. And people have found that having humor aids in that sense of psychological security and freedom. And I will argue with this that it is mainly up to upper management to kind of create that environment and have that top-down structure and then you start with the humor and then it bleeds down kind of through an organization. Finally, outside of the box thinking. So, humor requires out of the box thinking. And I've learned this in a lot of my stand up courses that what makes a joke funny and what makes a joke absurd and then therefore funny is when you make non obvious links and non obvious connections. So, for example, one of my favorite comedians, Taylor Tomlinson, she made a joke recently in which she compares dating to being a stuffed animal in a claw machine. And she says that that is ultimately like the reason people find that funny is because it's such an absurd connection. But as she explains the joke, she says you're just trying to get somebody to grasp you. Then it just makes sense. And that's what's funny about it. You're creating connections that aren't necessarily obvious. So outside of the box thinking, if you are used to doing that with like creating jokes and all of that, then also that ultimately helps you understand problems at different angles. And then it can lead you to increase creativity because now you're able to basically out connections that aren't obviously there. So, humor and innovation is really common in a lot of different companies. So, some companies try to encourage problem solving through environment. So, for anyone who's seen a Google Office or seen pictures of a Google Office, they know that it's very colorful. There's lots of different kind of rooms, they have games, and they try to foster kind of playtime, which we learn that is like playtime is basically helps to also increase your creativity, thus your humor. And Google also like has their own source of jokes. So Google, I don't know if everyone's familiar, they do an April Fool's prank. I believe they do it every year. So one prank that they have was Google knows. So you would search up like smell of freshly baked cookies and then they would say that now you can smell it. So that was one of the jokes. They also have jokes built into the product and I have a couple there. So if you Google in the search bar do a barrel roll askew and Google in 1998, I won't give too much away, but there's some fun things that happen there and I highly suggest people do them. They're a lot of fun. And it's just like Google has these kind of jokes and Easter eggs built into their product, and it's innovative, it's new. Like people love to see it. Like they're like, oh, that's interesting that Google did that. And they even have like when your Google is not connected to the internet, they have that Chrome dinosaur game. So they try to add like humor and fun and play into all aspects. They even have the concept of 20% time, in which Googlers are encouraged to spend 20% of their time on other projects in order to like innovate and be more creative. So I would argue that all of this is a result of like being humorous and being creative, and then that thus leads to innovation. So the pun that we're going to have right now is why did the Wi-Fi and the computer get married? Because they had a connection. I can't hear anyone, but I know that there's an uproar of laughter right now. Next, we're going to be talking about stress relief and resilience. Okay, so stress relief is like, as I mentioned at the very beginning, there is a lot of like relief that happens when you laugh. And well, like for example, in terms of short-term benefits, it stimulates your heart, your lungs, your muscles. It increases the endorphins that you release from your brain. It activates and relieves your stress response, and it ultimately soothes your tension because it stimulates circulation and aids muscle relaxation. But long-term benefits, it improves your immune system. Negative thoughts often manifest into our bodies into chemical reactions that can affect your body by bringing more stress into your system and decreasing your immunity. But when we have positive thoughts and kind of laughter and humor, then it helps to release neuropeptides that fight stress. So it also helps to relieve pain. So laughter can ease pain by causing the body to produce its own natural painkillers. As I mentioned before with the laughter therapy course, that 7-week course that people took, and it actually reduced the pain that they were in. It's really interesting to see the science behind humor and how like your body will be less stressed as a result of laughing more. Some more stuff about stress relief. So I recently read a study about humor in the workplace for healthcare workers. So healthcare workers have like a very stressful job, of course, and they often use humor for different purposes, such as to relieve tension in difficult situations that challenge their professional ability. So they did a study in which they tried to evaluate the effectiveness of a training program, and that training program was aimed at promoting an adaptive humor at work as a mechanism to deal with daily workplace stress for emergency healthcare professionals. Now, the results were really interesting because it showed that the suitability of promoting humor at work helped to reduce the effects of work stress and have greater psychological well-being. So they adapted it into the training program, and they saw that it worked. Like people responded well, and they thought they got increased feelings of psychological well-being, psychological safety. And I think that this will be really interesting to think about if we can start to use humor in trainings and stuff, because I think like as you are hired to a new company, if you see in the training that they are being more humorous and they're laughing and everyone's free, then you say, okay, this is the type of company where I can tell jokes and people don't take them like you can, like, not everyone's super serious all the time. I think that that is going to be really interesting to see in the future and how companies adopt to that. Now, with that being said, something is there are different types of humor. So there's positive humor, which is basically considered enhanced team cohesion, and forms of humor has shown to help with job performance, satisfaction, and reduced cost associated with burnout, withdrawal, and poor employee health. So positive humor has been good. However, there is something like called aggressive humor, in which that aggressive humor is punching down, you're insulting, you're making jokes at the expense of others. And no, and in this sense, we have to think about what is successful humor. And in successful humor means that both the sender and the receiver have found it funny. So if we do it in sorts of trainings and whatnot, then we have to ensure that people find that both it's like in a cultural way, sometimes jokes don't come across the same and all that. So you have to make sure that both the sender and receiver do find it funny. So that's something that I think would be really interesting to see as well, how training adapts and how people adapt to that. But I think at the end of the day, we all know humor is subjective. So we have to be mindful of that in terms of any sorts of jokes that we made, particularly in the workplace, because we do want to promote psychological safety. Then the joke I kind of have here is Big Bang before, and the content is nothing, because there was nothing before the Big Bang. And I thought that was funny. Another quote that I have by Charlie Chaplin is to truly laugh, you must be able to take your pain and play with it. So I think that, and I kind of mentioned play before as well. And I think play is something that we associate with children and those who are much younger than us. However, play is actually really important for us to practice in the sense that it helps to stimulate creativity and humor as well. And it's actually been shown, like through the science as well, that resilient people have known the value of humor. And basically, when you notice the humor in a situation, you almost become an observer in that situation you were in, because you've stepped back and able to look at it and introspect. So I think that as you are able to look at humor, you're also able to take things less seriously and be a bit more resilient as well. So I think it's a very, very important thing to do, and kind of be more mindful about taking things like as serious and just humor in the workplace. Okay, another pun. Why do app developers have such high insurance rates? They're always crashing. I thought that was funny too. We'll find out when I read the comments later. Okay, some real life examples. So there's actually a lot of companies who do this. So for those who can see, so Slack is one of these, is a company that it's a cultural phenomenon. Like everyone kind of knows Slack. A lot of companies use Slack, but they also use humor directly in its product. So you can send different memes, GIFs. Slackbot, which is their bot that they have, it can give you different responses. So if you see in the first Reddit one that I have, somebody created a huddle, which is basically a meeting in Slack, and they were in it for 0 minutes. And then Slackbot kind of sarcastically says, "You were in the huddle by yourself for 0 minutes, a productive session, we assume." So you can see that Slackbot is kind of being a little bit sassy here. And I think that if I were to see that, I would kind of like giggle too. I'd be like, you know what? They were right. They knew I did that by accident. So I think it's really funny that they have humor incorporated into their product. And I haven't played around too much with Slackbot, but I've heard that there's lots of different there's a lot of different things there that people really enjoy, like Slackbot's a little bit sassy here and there, and people like it. Slack also has humorous advertisements, and it's also become like that cultural phenomenon that I mentioned. In the tweet that I have there, it says, "Got 14 laugh emoji reactions on a Slack message. No one doing it better than me." And I think this is funny because this kind of gave Slack some play, but also everyone knows that feeling when you send a joke into a corporate chat and you're like, oh God, like you keep checking like if it did well and stuff. So I thought that was also funny, and people tweeting about it, I thought that was really, really funny. Another one, and we cannot go without talking about this, is Duolingo. So Duolingo is one of those companies that uses marketing and humor so well. So with TikTok's success, they gained more than 3 million followers in 1 year. So what did they do? How did they do this? So Duolingo's mascot is the Duolingo owl, and they started making jokes during COVID. I think probably it was likely a result of people being at home more, but they started deciding that they were going to really push the Duolingo owl. And they have a lot of inside jokes that they made, like that the Duolingo owl has a crush on Dua Lipa, and they also always engage in TikTok trends, and they always talk like every time a Dua Lipa song is trending, they like play around with it. And they do funny content with the Duolingo owl. Most notably, and I believe this was last week, they were like, "Rip Duo, Duo has died." And I do believe, like, I don't know, I haven't followed up with this, but I do believe that it's probably like, everyone's like asking now, like, I've seen multiple TikToks, like, where's Duo? Where did Duo go? Because they made this. And there was actually multiple article headlines about Duolingo owl dead. So they've really like humanized their mascot, and they do a lot of funny content with it. I would suggest taking a look at their TikTok because they do so much funny content. And Duolingo is a really good example of like adapting to the market. They saw the TikTok opportunity, and nowadays a lot of other markets are doing it, but Duolingo was 100% one of the first. Outside of the box, absurd videos, and they do a lot of this funny content. And now it has become the #1 education app in the Apple App Store. So they're clearly doing something right there. Okay, Microsoft. So Microsoft employees are encouraged to use humor to break tension, but they've also, like during the release of Windows 95, Jerry Seinfeld was featured in the Microsoft campaign where him and Bill Gates exchanged different jokes about the new operating system. And I watched some of these advertisements as I was researching for this, and a lot of people commented. They were like, "This is funny. Like, I wouldn't mind watching this ad more than once." And I think that's the most powerful thing. Like, if somebody doesn't mind watching your ad more than once, you've done a good job with your ad. So they've done humor with their advertising there. And why do I think it's important to understand, why does that work? When you have humor with your advertising, it makes the text seem less intimidating. It basically seems like, oh, it's just regular technology. But if they explained it in super, like you have a CEO just sitting there, explaining it, doing a really technical demo, that doesn't make the text seem less intimidating. So I think humor and innovation here is also really key. Also in their keynote, Satya Nadella, who is the current Microsoft CEO, also uses humor. And this kind of relates to what I talked about before with upper management, and how I think it's the job for that to trickle down, and upper management to ultimately show that humor and free thinking, innovation, and talking freely is really encouraged, and then going from there. Okay, my own experience. So I wanted to talk quickly about what I've learned from stand up and how I apply it to my job. So, firstly, the ability to pivot. So, I think that like I go to a lot of customer calls. And when you have a customer call, you don't often know their exact understanding of a product, or you don't necessarily know their exact tech stack that they are comfortable with. So when you go to a talk, when you go to a customer meeting, you get to ask questions. You can say, "Hey, are you familiar with Docker?" And they say yes or no. And then you kind of pivot your presentation or whatever you were going to show them from there. Same thing with stand up. So when I tell a joke and then I realize the audience hasn't laughed, I don't want to start making similar jokes to the one that nobody laughed at, because now I know this audience isn't going to laugh at those sorts of jokes. And it's even harder in stand up because I can't ask them, like, oh, you guys didn't find that funny. What wasn't funny about it? I have to just say, oh, okay, they didn't like that. Let's move on. Let's go to a new bit. Let's do a new joke. So I think the ability to pivot here is really, it's really helped, because I think it's on a much it's a really different scale on stand up, but I feel like it's a lot more intimidating because you have people looking at you and they're also like they're expecting you to make them laugh. I don't go to customer meetings and they expect me to make them laugh, or at least I hope not. And so I think the ability to pivot has really, really helped me, and being able to kind of get that feedback and be able to pivot very quickly. Also, confidence in the ability to try new things. Stand up is one of those things that I always thought was so intimidating. And now that I do it, and it's still intimidating, but once you do it, you kind of get over the hill and you're saying, like, oh, I was able to do that. Like, what other hard things can I do? And I'm a really strong proponent of being able to push yourself past your limits to prove to yourself that you were able to do hard things. And even if you fail, at least you tried and you can keep trying. And just being able to try new things. Like I feel like doing stand up has increased my confidence by quite a bit. Finally, breaking down complex concepts. So when I'm telling I get a 5 to 10 minute stand up set, I am not able to provide, like, if I'm telling a joke about my childhood, I cannot provide all the cultural context to that. I cannot explain how I was raised. I cannot do all of that to make the joke funny. And I have to just basically give them exactly the information that they need and what's important to the story. Same thing when I'm talking to a customer. You have to when you break down these complex concepts, they don't care about a lot of stuff. Like, you have to know what they care about. You have a limited amount of time. What are you going to give to them? And you're not going to sit there going over the history of anything, but it's very important that you understand, like, how to break down those complex concepts and what's important and what other people want to hear. Okay, this is my last pun. If anyone hates them, this is the last one, but I thought this was funny. It said, "What did the hackers out of office message say? Gone fishing." So, as I leave, I have just one last concluding thoughts. Um, so when you think about your life and what you do outside of your day-to-day job, think about how you can bring those concepts and put that into your work. So I didn't actively think about how I brought stand up into my work until recently, and I think it's made me a lot more mindful, and it makes me more aware of what I am bringing to the table. And I think that as people have different interests outside of their work, so whether they're into sports, whether they're into comedy, whatever they're into, if you think about what you learn from those experiences and how those shape you as a person and bring that to the table in your work, I think there's going to be a lot more diversity in terms of ideas. And I think that's how we get a good workforce with lots of different people and lots of different backgrounds. So I think that's really interesting. Think about your life, think about what you do, and think about how you can bring that into your work. And ultimately be creative. Try something new, do something that you never thought you would do, and you might surprise yourself. This has been so much fun. Thank you a lot. Please connect with me on LinkedIn if you're interested. I always love to chat. I do love to talk. So my LinkedIn is right there. It's just my full name. But I will also be emceeing for the next couple of hours. So you can also catch me there. So thank you guys so much.